What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul. I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. I've been in Japan for 20 years, and today I'm going to tell you part of the story of that 20 years, namely what brought me to Japan in the first place, and also why, after living here a while, it essentially evolved into my forever home. Two parts of the video are, one, telling of this story to you, but wrapped up within that story are some of the points of advice that I would give to anyone who is thinking about living in Japan, or is dreaming about living in Japan, or has just moved to Japan, or even if you're living here now for a year or so and you're beginning to think, should I stay in Japan? Is Japan right for me to live in the long term? So basically using my story as an illustrative experience for helping others who might want to, call this place their home. Now, I came to Japan in 2002, and my story begins with the fact I was an education major in college, and I was stuck in a program where if I wanted to graduate in 4 years, because it included student teaching and internships and all that kind of stuff, if I wanted to graduate in 4 years, I could not do a study abroad. And so I watched a lot of my friends go off to Germany, go off to China, go off to Spain, all these amazing places, and I was really envious of them because I didn't have a chance to live abroad myself. It was my junior year, and my roommate at the time, who was a Chinese major, said to me, well, why not try for the JET program? That's the Japan Exchange Teaching Program. You're going to be a teacher anyways. You can go live abroad for a little bit, get some teaching experience. Yeah, in English, which isn't your actual major for education, but still it's teaching, and you'll have that abroad experience. And I thought that sounds perfect. And so I applied for the JET program. I eventually got in and came to Japan. And back then, 2002, there was no Google yet, there were no smartphones. I was moving to Yamanashi Prefecture, which is the north slope of Mount Fuji, and I didn't know anything about the place because there was very little on the internet. And the point of this story, or the point that you should take from this story, is that I came to Japan knowing very little about the country. I didn't have any real investment in the culture. I wasn't, super into martial arts or anime or anything like that. I'd watched some anime in college, but I was well short of anything resembling an otaku. I mean, I enjoyed them, but not, I didn't really get super into it. And so I came to Japan with very few expectations. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know what it was going to be like, and everything was incredibly new and different. And the advice I would give is, I think it's a lot harder to do that these days. Japan is kind of universally seen as cool and a place that people want to visit and maybe want to live. And I feel like you can set yourself up a little bit for disaster if you have super high expectations for what life is going to be like here, especially if you visited as a tourist and had kind of the amazing theme park experience of Japan and just loved it here for the 2 or 3 weeks or however long you were here, and you think that living here is going to approach that kind of level. But visiting a place and living in a place are very, very different things, and that's the first lesson I would give. Now, when I first arrived in Japan, I essentially had 1 semester of Japanese language that I'd studied because I managed to fit it into my senior year around the student teaching, etc. And so I came to Japan knowing very, very little Japanese. And that's going to change the type of experience that you have here, obviously. But for me, it was amazing to start learning the language in the context of being here. But the best example I would give of that is having only a semester. I knew like the hiragana and katakana scripts, and I knew some really basic phrases, but I didn't really know even how to introduce myself yet. I basically knew how to say the Japanese equivalent of how you would introduce yourself in English. So I am Paul, watashi wa Paul desu, which is not how you actually introduce yourself in Japan. You have to learn things like hajimemashite, Paul to omoshimasu, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. Like, you learn the greeting very quickly because, well, in my case, I was meeting new people. I probably used this greeting that I was taught on the fly 30 times in the first 3 days I was in my new school environment, just introducing myself to the principal, the superintendent, the mayor of the town, other teachers. It was just a constant roundabout of introductions, and so yeah, you quickly learn those phrases, and you get that natural practice of the Japanese language. But depending on your language ability, your mileage will vary about how comfortable you are here at first. And now the dirty secret is a lot of people can live here without much Japanese. You can get into an English speaking bubble, and because Japanese are used to a lot of foreign tourists, and because they often don't expect foreigners to speak Japanese, you can just kind of get by. Now I feel like you're missing out on a lot. That's not the life I would like, but I don't judge. People can have really excellent lives here without having all that much language ability. That's just not for me. And this is not to make the point that you need to learn the language or that you don't have to learn the language, but it's actually leading to the point of dealing with mundane everyday existence. So I already mentioned that living here is not the same as visiting here, and that's because you now have to deal with things like making a bank account, paying bills, shopping for food, going to set up a account for your smartphone, getting internet for your apartment, etc., etc. And then just the mundane everyday existence of getting up, going to work, going to the supermarket, going home, hanging out. Depending on your job, you might not have a ton of money for lots of entertainment and travel. I mean, if you're working just as a English teacher in a language school or something, you may not have a lot of money for traveling as much as you would like, and so you have that to contend with. And those mundane things can start to weigh you down, and that's also a source of what could eventually become culture shock, where you're feeling like life here is too hard, the language barrier is too tough, the mundane existence, this isn't what I signed up for. I was trying to come to Japan as an adventure or a change in my life. But actually, this is where I would give my second piece of advice, which is I never really dropped into serious culture shock. I never really had the super low where I was depressed about how hard life was, or I was paranoid that everything was out to get me, like people were talking about me behind my back in Japanese and I couldn't understand, or these systems were designed to be difficult for foreigners or whatever. I never fell into that deep sense of culture shock, mostly because I took each thing that came at me as like a new adventure. It felt like every step I took to make my life more normal, like I could begin to function as an ordinary citizen in Japan, was like me becoming more of a whole person. Like I started off in the country as a baby, and I was striving to become an adult and becoming a fully functional member of a new society that was so different from the one I grew up in became just this driving goal for me that made living here so much more interesting. And I found that that's why I felt uncomfortable when I went back to the States for grad school, because suddenly I was back in my home environment, the one I grew up in, and as such, it was, to put it in one word, uninteresting. It was just uninteresting to live in the States anymore. I mean, why I could find opening a bank account or, getting a new smartphone and all those kind of annoying things to be an adventure or to be a sign of me being a functioning adult in society, it's just an attitude that I think I adopted very early, and it really, really served me well to have that attitude, so that all of those things that could have brought me down into culture shock or despair of some sort, instead was like a challenge, and was like, how can I become, accepted and be just a normal part of society and show that, I know how things work here. A specific story I would give is I'd been in Japan for like 5 months or 6 months, and my teachers in my school told me, hey, you should stop by the convenience store and buy a black tie And you're wearing a black suit, so just add a black tie, because after school today we're going to go to the funeral viewing of a teacher whose father had passed away, and we were just going to go pay our respects after school at the funeral parlor. And for me, this was just, oh my, how, I don't know anything about Japanese funerals. I've there's no information on the internet yet, because this is 2002, or I guess it was 2003 at that point. And how, I'm not going to know what to do. Like, how do I act? How do I react? I only had a handful of funeral experiences in America, even, because you don't go to funerals all that often, and this was my first one in Japan. And I was really worried about doing something embarrassing, or not paying respects properly. And this is my third point that I would make, which is one of the best things you can do for your attitude or for your behavior in Japan is to become a really conscientious observer of other people. You may not be much of a people watcher, you may not really care about people around you in your home country, but in Japan you really should start doing so. It really is a good idea to be a conscientious observer, because you watch, you observe, you mimic, and then you internalize. And then you can begin to function and be that normal person in Japanese society and know how things work. And the cool thing about it in Japan is that if you do that, if you observe, you mimic, and you internalize, basically so much about Japanese social structure and society is formulaic. So once you get the formulas down, you know how to act in just about every single situation. It's actually not a very difficult cultural nut to crack. It's one of the reasons why a lot of foreigners can live in a non-Japanese speaking bubble, because you can still learn how to act socially like a Japanese and put an outward face of knowing how the culture works, even if you don't have really strong Japanese language ability. It's one of those things that you can have the one without the other. You can have the cultural know-how, and I see this in my friends who don't speak much Japanese. They have decent lives here, and they know how to act in society, even though they don't have much Japanese language. And so that's one of the interesting aspects about it. But if you become this conscientious observer, if you actually pay attention, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, you got to observe what the Romans are doing to be able to do that. And if you do, your life in Japan can become very smooth. Now, of course, the downside of this is, because if you look visibly foreign like me, you might know that you act like a normal adult in the society, but you're going to be treated like a baby sometimes. People aren't going to know that you live here. They're going to assume you're a tourist, or they're going to assume you don't know Japanese customs. And so you're going to get the, "Oh, can you use chopsticks?" comment. And it's kind of like, "Oh, do you want the sippy cup? Do you need a sippy cup?" Getting treated like a baby again. And that can be frustrating. It's frustrating for a lot of people. And I actually had this happen to me with a professor at a university where I teach part-time. We were having a meeting. It was a lunch meeting, and so the university provided bentos for us. And this professor, who's known me for 10 years, thereby know that I've been living in Japan for more than 10 years, asked me if it's okay to have hashi, chopsticks, with the bento. And that's exactly what went through my mind. It was like, "Oh, do you want the sippy cup? Do you need the sippy cup, Paul?" Like, come on. I've been here 10 years. How would I have survived without knowing how to use chopsticks? But that's going to happen. And that's where you have to just kind of let it roll off your back. Don't be bothered by it. If that sort of thing bothers you, then yeah, you're going to have a tough time in Japan. Now, the story of how I made friends in Japan. My best Japanese friends are people that I met and keep in contact with through groups that I joined, through extracurriculars that I did outside of work and outside of kind of my social life with the other foreign teachers that were in my neighborhood. Part of it was mutual acquaintances. I got introduced to some people and became friends with certain Japanese, and it was, friends of friends. So you get to know people. If you made a couple of friends initially, you'll be invited to things and you'll end up meeting other people that way. But probably the best way to meet people and make friends is to join something, because Japan is a very group-oriented society. A lot of Japanese have made their strongest and fastest friends from their groups, their circles from their school days. So their junior high school friends, their high school friends, their college friends. And showing up as an adult foreigner in Japan, you're going to have missed out on that most likely, unless you're coming here as an exchange student, which is a great time to make friends, honestly. If you're coming here as an exchange student, you have a nice advantage, I believe. Now, there's a common complaint that I actually get from exchange students whom I teach, that they try to get Japanese to get together and do something at some point in the future, and they get yes, oh yeah, of course, yeah, we should go out drinking, or yeah, we should do a barbecue, blah, 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 and then they end up getting completely ghosted. That's a very common experience here. And the issue there is because if you've given this kind of vague sometime in the future suggestion, in Japan they don't want to just say no. They don't want to make you feel bad by saying, I don't know if I'll be able to do it, I'm really busy. They're not going to come out and say that. They're going to actually say, oh yeah, we should do that sometime. And then just assume that the matter is dropped. So it's not generally a good idea to just vaguely say, let's do something. It's much better to have an actual event, like say, me and these people are having a barbecue on Saturday. We'd love it if you would come. So now you've got a set date, a set time, and so they're going to have to give you an actual answer of, oh yeah, I would love to come, or I'm too busy, or you're going to get a real answer of yes or no of some sort. So be concrete, be specific. And I also highly recommend you give them some kind of wiggle room. For example, tell them, hey, and if you want to invite a couple of people a couple of your friends to come along, please do so. That's helpful because sometimes if you're just talking to one person, they're going to be nervous. I'm not going to know anyone there. I'm not going to be able to talk to anyone. It's going to be a nerve-wracking experience, and so they'll be more likely to bow out and say no. But if you say, hey, bring some people that way you're going to be more likely for them to say yes and come. And also, be sure to make it clear that they are under no obligation to join. If you try to strong-arm them, like, oh, it's going to be so much fun, things that we'll say to friends in America, like, if you don't come, you're going to be missing out, it's going to be a great time. If you do that kind of strong-arming in Japan, you're going to be kind of pushing in their minds this obligation on them to attend, and so they're going to be probably more annoyed than excited about attending this event. You've obligated them to show up, and that's not going to be an attractive thing for a lot of people. You want to give them the wiggle room and say, you don't have to come. It's going to be, it's low key. You can leave early if you have to. Give them the chance to get out of it if they're not feeling comfortable with actually attending. Because if you strong arm them into it, they'll show up, but you haven't really made a friend. You've probably made someone who's a little bit irritated with you, that you force them into this situation. So yeah, just be careful about the social interactions in that way. You don't want anything to feel like it's an obligation. But it is a good idea to have a concrete date, time, event that you're inviting people to, because the vague, sometime in the future, let's get together, that will not fly. Personally, I don't think making friends, and specifically Japanese friends in Japan, is as difficult as many people say. But 100%, if you know Japanese, it's going to be much, much easier. So I think that should go without saying. But even without Japanese, I think of some of the interesting Japanese people I've met who are friends of friends who are foreigners who don't speak much Japanese, but they still have really interesting Japanese friends. So it isn't a prerequisite. You don't have to know Japanese to make good Japanese friends. It's just gonna help. Alright, I was thinking recently that one of the things I want to do coming up is a live stream question and answer session. If you would like to see that happen, let us know in the comments. Also, if you live in Japan and you've had experiences like the ones I described today, talk about them, share them in the comments below. If you are thinking about moving to Japan and you want to know more things about living here and what it's like, ask questions in the comment section or suggest possible topics that I can talk about in the future. I'd be very happy to address those, and I always read the comments and respond to probably 99% of them. So join in the conversation below. Greatly appreciate if you would. But at any rate, I want to thank you very much for watching this particular video. I do have a Patreon if you want to support me directly. That'll be linked below. My Instagram is Exjapter, just like the name of this channel. So you can find me over on Instagram, and you can follow content that is not like YouTube. It's more like daily life and where I am and what I'm doing content. Two other possible ways to support the channel is I am sponsored by Sakura-ko. So if you want to get a subscription box to Japanese sweets and treats, you can use my link below and get a discount. And I've recently partnered with a Japanese language school. They teach Japanese online, and if you use my link, you'll be able to get a discount, and you can also do 2 free trial lessons. Now, I haven't used this company myself, but I have friends who have, and they raved about it, saying like, oh, I got my Japan N2 level studying with them, and oh, my Japanese improved for my job, and I was able to get this job in this business because I reached business level Japanese, largely because I used the school for my Japanese lessons. So I felt comfortable partnering with them because of what my friends had to say about it. So you can check out that link below as well. But at the end of the day, hitting like and subscribe are the best ways to support the channel, and I really appreciate that you took the time to watch this video. I'll catch you on the next one. And watch another one. It's probably showing you one on the screen right now. Check that out, and I'll see you next time. Peace.